It was a hot June evening in Bakersfield, the kind of night where the heat seems to stick to your skin, making even the simplest movements feel heavy. I had been working a long shift, covering calls all over the outskirts of town, when the dispatch came through just after 10:30 p.m. The message was brief, almost too casual for what it described. A car stuck on the railroad tracks near a rural intersection. I knew the area. It was mostly flat, dry farmland with patches of scrub and a few abandoned structures scattered along the old roads. No streetlights, only the faint glow of distant homes, and the crossing itself had long since stopped being regularly used. My partner was behind me in the second unit, and I was the first to arrive, headlights cutting through the warm, dusty night. When I turned onto the gravel road leading to the tracks, I saw the car immediately. The hazard lights were blinking in the darkness, casting short, erratic shadows over the nearby fields. It was a late-model sedan, older, faded silver paint, a little dented on the side. The engine was still running, a low hum mixing with the distant chirping of crickets and the occasional rumble of a car passing far down the highway. The first thing I noticed as I approached was that the car was completely empty. No one behind the wheel, no one in the passenger seat. My stomach sank slightly. Something about the emptiness in the middle of nowhere at night has a way of making your skin crawl. I stopped my patrol vehicle a safe distance away, killing the engine, and grabbed my flashlight. I could see the road behind me in patches, the warm air thick and heavy, smelling faintly of dust and oil. My boots crunched over the gravel as I walked toward the sedan. The door was unlocked, swinging slightly in a light breeze that carried the smell of dry grass and something metallic I couldn't place at first. I hesitated before opening the driver's side, the light from my flashlight catching the edges of the interior. Everything looked normal, at first, but when I leaned in to peer deeper, I saw it. On the back seat, almost tucked into the corner where no one would expect it, was a small teddy bear. At first, it looked harmless, but then I noticed the red stains marring its soft brown fur. My stomach twisted as I realized it was blood. I reached closer and saw a folded piece of paper under the bear. My hands were steady enough, but there was a faint tremor I couldn't suppress as I picked it up and unfolded it. Written in jagged, uneven letters were the words, "You'll find the next one." I froze, the weight of the paper heavier than it should have been. My flashlight beam wavered as my mind raced. The area around me was silent, except for the faint buzz of the car's engine and the occasional distant bark of a dog somewhere in the farmland. I barely noticed my partner shouting over the radio. His voice was panicked, cutting through the static, "There's a train coming." My body reacted before my brain caught up. I bolted from the car, leaving the doors open and the note in my hand. My boots struck the gravel hard, and I turned to look down the tracks. There was nothing. No train. Not even a light in the distance. Just the long, empty stretch of rails reflecting the dim glow of my flashlight. By the time I reached my partner's unit, his face was pale, eyes wide. He told me he thought he saw headlights at the far end of the track, but it vanished before he could react. We both ran back to the car together, heartbeats hammering, but when we arrived, the vehicle was exactly where it had been, but empty in a different way. The note, the teddy bear, even the engine that had been running was gone. Not a trace of them remained. I radioed dispatch, checked the surrounding area, combed through the fields with the flashlight, even checked the ditch along the road. Nothing. It was as if the entire scene had been a projection, except for the faint indentations in the gravel from the tires. The case didn't make sense. Whoever, or whatever, had left the car there knew exactly how to manipulate the situation. It was too precise to be random, too calculated to be a prank. My mind replayed the events over and over, the car, the note, the bear, the sound of my partner's frantic voice on the radio, the feeling of pure, unshakable dread as I sprinted away. I could not get the image out of my head. The thought that someone had been watching us from the shadows, maybe from the fields just beyond our sight, was worse than anything else. The fear wasn't just for the unknown next victim. It was the fact that whoever orchestrated this knew we were there, knew exactly how we would react, and used it against us. The next day, I returned to the intersection with my partner, retracing every step. The tracks were empty, the road quiet under the blazing June sun, and still there was no sign of the car, the bear, or the note. We took photographs, marked the area, reported it fully, but there were no leads. No fingerprints, no tire tracks beyond the ones we had made ourselves. Nothing in the surrounding area that indicated human presence the night before. The case went cold, filed away as abandoned vehicle, possible tampering, but the truth of it was far more sinister. The details didn't fit any normal explanation. The person who set it up knew law enforcement procedure, knew timing, knew exactly how to trigger panic and chaos. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the empty seat, the bloodstained bear, the note with its threatening message. I drove past the tracks frequently, always scanning the edges of the fields, expecting to see a figure just standing there watching. I changed my routine, taking different roads to patrol, checking the radio more often, watching for anything unusual. The fear lingered, the kind that burrows under your skin and makes ordinary silence feel heavy and oppressive. Eventually, the department received another call in a similar pattern, miles away, and the investigation showed a person had been using abandoned vehicles as traps or decoys. Surveillance from local residents caught glimpses of someone watching from the shadows, but the individual was never identified. The department strengthened its protocols, and we learned to approach such situations with more caution, but the knowledge that someone could manipulate our presence so precisely never left me. Years later, the intersection is quiet. The tracks are still there, rarely used, the gravel roads still cracked and dusty. Occasionally a patrol drives by, the occasional car rolls through, but I still avoid stopping there unless absolutely necessary. The note's words, "You'll find the next one," echo in my mind, not a literal threat, but a reminder of how methodical and precise a human mind can be when bent on causing fear. It was a case without a neat resolution, but it taught me a lesson about the weight of observation, the terror of the unseen, and the unsettling understanding that some people plan things so carefully that even trained officers can be rendered helpless in an instant. That intersection became a reminder. Danger isn't always visible, and sometimes the scariest moments are entirely human. I was working the night shift at the Detroit precinct, the old building on Jefferson Avenue, just past midnight. The precinct itself felt like a relic from another era, with the peeling paint, flickering fluorescent lights, and the faint smell of stale coffee and industrial cleaner that never quite went away. The night was quiet, as it usually was around 1 a.m., the kind of quiet that presses down on your shoulders and makes every sound echo in your head. Then the first call came in. A man panicked, screaming incoherently into the phone. I answered quickly, trying to calm him, but all I could catch was fragments of fear, a trembling voice that didn't form sentences, just cries and gasps. The call ended before I could get much information, and I logged it as a typical late-night panic. But then it happened again, and again. Every time, he called from the same number. At first, it was chaos in his voice. I could hear him running, doors slamming, maybe furniture shifting. But after 2 hours, the tone changed. The panic gave way to something precise, calculated. Every time I answered, there was silence for exactly 30 seconds. 30 long, tense seconds where I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. And then, in a whisper so quiet it sent shivers down my spine, he said the same thing. "I see you." My stomach sank. Something about the repetition, the exact timing, and the calmness in the voice after 2 hours of panicked screams made my chest tighten. This wasn't someone losing control, this was deliberate. Someone was testing me, or watching. We traced the call. It wasn't far, just across the street from the precinct, in a building long abandoned. Broken windows, graffiti covering the brick walls, the kind of place that smelled like wet concrete and rot, where you could feel the darkness pressing in even in the middle of the day. My partner and I grabbed our flashlights, checked our weapons, and headed out. The street was empty, silent except for the faint hum of a distant neon sign. The closer we got to the building, the more I felt it. A presence, not physical but in the air, like eyes tracing our every step. We stepped over broken glass at the entrance, the flashlight beams cutting narrow paths through the blackness. The smell hit first, damp, moldy, and metallic. Old pipes, wet concrete, and something else that made the back of my throat tighten. As we moved through the first room, my light caught scraps of graffiti, old posters peeling off the walls, rusted furniture tipped over, and a stairwell leading to the upper floors. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, deliberate. Fingernails on metal, coming from above. The kind of sound that makes your skin crawl. We froze, flashlights swinging toward the ceiling, but saw nothing. My partner reached for his radio to call for backup, and the tapping stopped instantly. Not a pause, not fading out, just gone. Silence fell, thicker than before, oppressive. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. We called for backup, trying to stay calm, But as soon as the other units pulled up outside, the tapping started again, then stopped the moment they entered. The building was empty. Absolutely empty. Every room we checked, every floor, every stairwell, we found nothing. No one hiding in the shadows, no one behind the walls. Later, we reviewed the security cameras from the surrounding buildings. There was one feed from the alley across the street. At first, nothing. Then, in the corner of the frame, a shadow shifted. A figure crouched in the darkness, watching us. And then, as our flashlights swept across the floor, it vanished. Not running away, not ducking out of sight, it disappeared. Just gone, as if it had never been there. I spent the rest of my shift in the precinct, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak in the floor, every hum of the old air system, every shadow cast by the flickering fluorescent lights made me flinch. I kept my partner close for the next few nights. We patrolled the block around the abandoned building, but never saw anyone. Not a footprint, not a movement, not a sound beyond the usual city noise. The man never called again. At least, not from that number. But every time the phone rang late at night, my hand went to the radio before I even answered. The whisper haunted me, repeated in my head, exactly as it had been spoken. I see you. It wasn't supernatural. I knew that. It was human. Someone out there, precise and patient, capable of watching, waiting, and disappearing without a trace. That was worse than any ghost. That was real danger. We eventually secured the building for a short while, boarding up windows and posting notices that it was condemned. But I knew it didn't matter. Whoever it was could have found another place, another time. The precision, the patience, the confidence, they weren't things you could barricade against. Months later, I walked past that same building in daylight. The light made it look like any other abandoned structure, and yet, I remembered every shadow, every tap, every heartbeat as if it had happened yesterday. I remembered the whisper, the way it slid through the room and into my chest. The city goes on, people move, streets fill with life again, but that night stayed with me. It reminded me that danger isn't always loud. Sometimes it's patient. Sometimes it just watches. Even in uniform, even with training and equipment, you're still vulnerable. I realized that night that control is often an illusion. We patrolled, we responded, we called for backup, but one person, alone in the dark, could unsettle us completely. That knowledge never leaves you. It sits in your chest, quietly, reminding you that no matter how safe you feel, someone is always out there, watching, knowing things you don't. I still pass by that block sometimes, years later, and I still feel it. The building is fenced off now, but every time I see those broken windows, I remember the silence, the tap, and the whisper. I remember the feeling of being seen, fully, without a sound. And I carry it with me because it's real. Not a story, not a ghost. Just a human being, patient, deliberate, and capable of vanishing. That realization has changed how I see the city, my job, and even my own sense of safety. No matter where I go, I know someone could be watching. I know I'm vulnerable. And I know somehow that makes all the difference. It was just past 3 in the morning on a quiet Tuesday when the call came through. The dispatcher's voice was calm but clipped, the kind of professionalism that hides the tension behind the words. Neighbors in a downtown apartment complex reported hearing strange noises coming from one of the units. The description was vague, just knocking, scratching, things moving, and the caller sounded shaken. I grabbed my jacket, holstered my sidearm, and headed out with my partner. The streets were empty, the air heavy with humidity, and the city seemed unusually silent, the kind of silence that makes every small sound echo in your head. The building itself was old, brick and mortar, with narrow hallways and a faint smell of damp carpet mixed with the lingering scent of last night's trash. We reached the unit the neighbors had mentioned. The door was a standard wooden door with a peephole, nothing fancy, and the hallway light flickered slightly above us. We knocked and announced ourselves, flashlights sweeping the cracked linoleum floor. After a few tense moments, a young woman opened the door. Her face was pale, eyes wide, lips trembling, and tears streaked her cheeks. There was a stiffness in her posture, the way someone moves when they are exhausted but afraid to show it completely. She gestured for us to come inside, and the moment we stepped into her apartment, a wave of unease hit me. The place was small but clean. Everything in it suggested she took care of her home, yet there was something off. Every drawer in the kitchen was open, the contents shifted slightly. Plates and cups were lined up as if someone had been arranging them and left. In the living room, cushions on the couch were slightly askew. On the kitchen counter sat a single glass, half full, with smudged fingerprints forming a rough handprint. The way it pointed toward the living room made my skin crawl, like some silent instruction meant only to unsettle. We went through the apartment systematically, checking each room, each closet, each nook where someone could hide. All doors and windows were locked, no signs of forced entry, no broken locks or smashed glass. Nothing about the physical security of the apartment suggested anyone could have entered and left unnoticed. Yet the woman insisted that someone had been in her apartment, walking through her life, touching her things, leaving small but terrifying traces that no one else could explain. We expanded our search to the building itself. Hallways, stairwells, basement, and rooftop. Nothing. No signs of anyone lurking, no footprints, no doors forced open, nothing. The building was empty except for us and the tenants who had reported the noises. Every step echoed in the narrow stairwell, and the silence was so thick that even my own breathing sounded loud. We spent hours combing the area, running checks on the cameras, interviewing neighbors, looking for any clue that might explain the presence of someone in the apartment without leaving a trace. Nothing came up. No reports of suspicious individuals entering the building, no fingerprints outside the glass we found, no noise caught on the cameras. The woman refused to leave her apartment afterward. She barricaded herself in her home, refusing to let anyone near, including family and friends who tried to help. She would call the building manager daily to report strange noises, objects moved, glasses out of place, things that didn't make sense. She described hearing faint footsteps in the night, feeling watched, sensing the presence of someone who could vanish at will. We documented everything, filed reports, and tried to reassure her, but the feeling that something had intruded into her life and left without a trace lingered. Weeks passed. The apartment remained her fortress. Our investigation yielded nothing concrete. She moved very little, never went out alone, and the incidents began to affect her work and social life. The building manager installed new locks, changed security codes, added motion detectors in the hallways, but she remained uneasy. Everything was functional, everything theoretically secure, but the fear had already taken root. Months later, another tenant reported similar incidents in the same building. A man in his 20s called us late at night, saying he had noticed drawers slightly ajar, items shifted on his shelves, and faint, unexplained noises coming from empty rooms. He described the sensation of being watched, small things displaced in ways that suggested someone had been moving through his apartment without leaving any visible trace. We responded quickly, knowing the previous case and fully prepared for the unease of the unknown. Again, we combed through the building, apartment by apartment. No forced entries, no suspicious footprints, no evidence of anyone hiding. The similarities to the first case were undeniable. The small disruptions, the fear it created, the precision with which someone could move through another person's life without leaving tangible evidence. Whoever had done this seemed to know exactly how to operate silently, leaving terror without trace, moving like a shadow but leaving an unmistakable mark on the psyche of the people who lived there. We spoke with other tenants, reviewed security footage for the past several months, and noted patterns. Late at night, when hallways were empty, small noises could be heard near specific apartments. Some residents reported missing items returned slightly moved or out of order, glasses with fingerprints, or doors they were sure they had locked slightly ajar. Nothing conclusive, nothing that would allow us to identify a suspect. It was frustrating, maddening even, because everything suggested human presence, but left no evidence to follow up. After months of investigation, we began documenting it as a specialized case. We created profiles, timelines, and detailed reports for each tenant who experienced intrusion-like events. The focus shifted from finding the intruder to understanding the patterns, warning tenants, and helping them secure their homes as best as possible. Psychological evaluations of the residents suggested heightened anxiety, sleep disruption, and ongoing fear. The impact was real, measurable, and deeply disturbing. In time, the building manager invested in more comprehensive security, new locks, surveillance cameras covering all hallways and stairwells, and a security guard on night shifts. The tenants were informed to report anything unusual immediately. Slowly, the occurrences tapered off, and the fear began to fade. It was never fully explained how the intruder had managed to move through apartments undetected, how they could manipulate space and objects without leaving conventional evidence, but the measures taken minimized opportunities for repetition. Looking back, the entire experience left a mark on me. It was not about supernatural forces, not about imagination or stories. It was about human capability, patience, knowledge of routine, and a terrifying ability to remain unseen while invading another person's private space. Months of patrols, interviews, and documentation emphasized how methodical and precise this person had been. They had studied patterns, they had operated with extreme caution, and their actions created fear that was impossible to measure physically. Eventually, life in the building returned to a cautious normal. The original tenant learned to coexist with the lingering fear, leaving her apartment only with company, locking doors multiple times, double-checking windows, and maintaining a level of vigilance that was exhausting but necessary. The second tenant did the same, and others in the building became hyper-aware of their environment. The intruder, whoever they were, had left, or at least ceased their activity, but the memory of their presence stayed. It remains a realistic reminder of how someone could manipulate a space and terrorize others without ever being caught. The lessons were clear: vigilance matters, security matters, and the most frightening invasions of privacy are those that leave no trace, only the lingering sense of violation. For me, as a police officer, it reinforced that not all fear has visible roots, and not all danger announces itself with noise or evidence. Sometimes, the most terrifying intrusions are the silent ones, executed with careful precision, leaving only the knowledge that someone has been inside your life, unseen, and capable of returning at any time. The case was never solved, but the documentation and increased security measures prevented further incidents, offering a sense of closure that was measured, practical, and grounded in reality. Months later, after reviewing every report, following every lead, and installing every possible security measure, it became clear that some things could never be fully explained. We would never know the identity of the person who had silently walked through apartments, leaving terror behind without leaving fingerprints that could convict them. The important thing was that the building had changed, the residents had changed, and the sense of safety, though cautious and tentative, had been restored. The terror existed in memory and habits, in the careful watching of locks and doors, but the immediate threat had ended, at least for now. It was around 2:15 in the morning when the call came in, a domestic disturbance at a small apartment complex on the west side of Cincinnati. I had been working the night shift for a little over 5 years, and I knew that hours like this could stretch from routine to dangerous in a heartbeat. The dispatcher said the caller was a woman claiming her husband was threatening her. Nothing unusual on the surface, but my gut told me to be careful. When I pulled up, the lot was nearly empty. A few cars were scattered around, their surfaces wet from the recent rain. Streetlights flickered in the misty haze, making the complex look abandoned and uninviting. I grabbed my flashlight and badge, checked my radio, and approached the front door. She answered almost immediately. Her face was wet with tears, makeup smudged, her hands trembling. She was clearly terrified. I asked her to step aside so I could enter, and she did, still crying, explaining that her husband had been threatening her again. The moment I stepped inside, I noticed something immediately wrong. The apartment was quiet, unnaturally quiet. I had responded to dozens of domestic disturbance calls, and there was usually some kind of mess, broken dishes, overturned chairs, signs of a struggle. Here, there was none. The living room was completely empty, except for the faint outline of where furniture might have been. The carpet looked newly vacuumed. There was no broken glass, no overturned chairs, nothing. Just bare walls and a strange silence that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. I moved cautiously down the hallway. Every step echoed in the empty space. The woman followed behind me, whispering about her husband again, saying he had been angry but wasn't here now. I nodded and kept looking. That's when I noticed the basement door at the end of the hallway. It was slightly ajar, a dark gap yawning down into the shadows. There were no basements listed in the building plans, no indication that anyone was supposed to live or go down there. The door was small, narrow, and I realized my gut was twisting again. Something about this didn't feel right. I called for backup immediately, keeping my voice calm over the radio. 2 units were on their way. While I waited, I shined my flashlight into the basement. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing steep, narrow stairs. The smell hit me before I even descended. It was damp, old, and musty, like mold mixed with something metallic, blood maybe, though I tried not to think that. It was an unnatural combination, the kind that settles into your lungs and doesn't leave. When the backup arrived, we carefully descended the stairs. The basement was small, almost like a crawl space, but someone had clearly made it a living area. There were dozens of personal items neatly stacked on shelves and the floor. IDs, photographs, old letters, notebooks. Everything looked cataloged and organized, almost obsessively so. On one of the plaster walls, names and dates were scratched deeply, the marks looking years old. It was like someone had been keeping track of people, maybe even tracking the woman upstairs. I shined my light across the room, moving slowly, checking every corner. There were no mattresses, no obvious bedding, but there was evidence that someone had been sleeping there. A small pile of folded clothing in a corner, a few empty food containers, a half-empty water bottle. Whoever it was had been careful. Everything was tidy, almost like they were trying not to be seen. Then, out of nowhere, there was a heavy sound from above. It sounded like someone had slammed something against the floor. My heart leapt. My back up and I ran upstairs, guns drawn, flashlights sweeping the hallways. But there was nothing. Every apartment door we checked was locked and empty. The woman still stood near the front door, panicked, and I tried to reassure her while keeping my mind racing. Whoever had made that sound wasn't upstairs. We tried to call the husband. The number he had listed in the system was disconnected. Multiple attempts to locate him came up empty. No car, no address, no trace. The more we searched, the more we realized how precise and careful this intruder had been. Whoever had been living in that basement for weeks, or possibly months, had moved around silently, without leaving fingerprints or DNA, without triggering alarms or neighbors noticing. It was impossible. We couldn't find how they had entered, where they had slept exactly, or how they had managed to avoid detection every single day. We spent hours examining the apartment. Every surface, every wall, every vent and duct was checked. The basement had no obvious entrance from the outside, no broken windows, no loose vents. Whoever had done this had known the building intimately. They had known the woman's schedule, her habits, and had found a way to stay hidden, watching, cataloging. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were late, that something worse could have happened at any moment, and we wouldn't have known until it was too late. My backup tried to reason it out, saying maybe it was a squatter or a homeless person who had been sneaking in, but even that didn't make sense. There were no signs of normal living. No trash, no erratic mess, just a meticulous, carefully arranged set of personal items and records. Someone had been inside without leaving a trace, and that was the most chilling part of all. By the time the sun began to rise, we had secured the apartment as best we could, documented everything, and told the woman to stay with a friend for the day. We called in additional units and investigators to handle the basement and try to trace how the intruder had been getting in and out. The building management was shaken when they saw the basement, insisting there had never been anyone assigned to that space. Over the next few days, we conducted follow-ups. We combed through surveillance from nearby streets, checked the woman's schedule, and tried to find any sign of the intruder. But there was nothing. No evidence, no pattern, nothing. Whoever had been inside that basement had vanished completely, leaving only the traces of their obsession behind. Even now, months later, I remember walking through that empty apartment, staring at the basement door, and feeling the weight of someone having been there without my knowledge. There was no fairy tale explanation, no ghosts, just the stark reality that someone had observed every part of someone else's life and managed to remain invisible. The scariest thing wasn't that they were there, it was knowing how easily they could have been, how they could still be. And that realization, more than any sound or shadow, is what kept me awake for nights after the call. It was around 1:20 a.m. when I was patrolling the streets near Wicker Park. The area was quiet, almost eerily so. Street lights cast long shadows across the cracked sidewalks, and the occasional flicker from a broken neon sign in a nearby bar painted the buildings with uneven pools of light. My cruiser's engine hummed softly as I drove slowly through the narrow streets, paying attention to every corner, every alley. That's when the dispatch came through. A local business owner had reported a suspicious white van parked in a narrow alley behind their store. They hadn't seen anyone around it, but something about the way it was parked made them uneasy. I pulled up slowly, my headlights cutting through the darkness. The alley was tight, the walls of the surrounding buildings close enough that I had to angle my car carefully. The van was there, just as the caller had described. White, unmarked, with no visible logos. It was older, the paint dull and scratched. The tires had sunk slightly into the uneven ground, leaving faint imprints in the dirt and debris. Nothing seemed out of place at first glance, but the sense of unease hit me immediately. It was parked too close to the wall, almost like it was trying to stay hidden, and the windows were tinted dark, so I couldn't see inside. I stepped out of my cruiser, the cool night air hitting my face, carrying the faint smell of garbage and wet concrete. The alley was silent except for the distant hum of traffic on North Avenue. I approached the van cautiously, my hand resting near my service weapon, my flashlight in the other. I circled to the driver's side and knocked firmly on the door. No response. I tried the handle, it was locked. The van sat completely still, as if frozen in the shadows, but something about it didn't feel right. I moved to the back of the van, keeping my eyes on the darkened windows. That's when I noticed the hatch at the rear was slightly ajar. Not enough to stick my head in, but just enough that I could see a sliver of the interior. My heart rate picked up. I pried the hatch open slowly, keeping my flashlight trained inside. My light fell on dozens of metal cages stacked neatly along the walls of the van. Most of them were empty, but one cage at the bottom held a small animal. It was shivering violently, too scared to move, and its eyes reflected the beam of my flashlight. The smell of urine and fear hit me immediately. The animal wasn't familiar, but it was clear it had been kept there for some time. As I leaned closer, trying to assess the situation, the driver's seat shifted slightly, as if someone had been sitting there a second ago. I froze. My mind raced. There was no way anyone could have moved that seat without me noticing. Whoever had been here had to be close. The thought that someone could be moving around the area silently, unnoticed, made my skin crawl. I stepped back, my flashlight scanning the alley, every shadow stretching into a potential hiding place. I reached for my radio, calling for backup. My voice was calm, professional, but the tension was high. While waiting, I kept my eyes on the van, noting every small detail. The doors were still locked from the outside. The small animal was trembling in the cage, and I could see faint scratch marks on the metal, probably from attempts to escape. The air around the van was heavy, thick with the smell of damp metal and old fabric. I crouched slightly to keep myself low, peering into the alley for any signs of movement. There was none, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching from the shadows, just out of sight. Minutes passed. I could hear my own breathing, harsh and uneven in the quiet night. Then I heard the distant siren of another unit approaching. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered with tension. I stayed near the van, keeping my flashlight trained on it, ready for anything. When backup arrived, I explained the situation quickly and pointed to the van. My colleagues got out and moved cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. We checked the van thoroughly. Every door, every panel, every inch inside. But it was empty. Completely empty. The cages were gone, the hatch that had been open was now locked, and the small animal was nowhere to be found. There were no signs of how it could have disappeared so quickly. It was like the van had been emptied in the seconds between my call and the arrival of backup. Every possibility ran through my mind. Someone hiding in the shadows, someone running through alleys we couldn't see, even the idea of traps or secret compartments in the van. But there was nothing concrete, nothing to hold on to. We combed the surrounding area, checking every corner of the alley, peering behind dumpsters and trash bins, but there was no trace of anyone. The silence was oppressive. The only sound was our own movement and the distant hum of the city. I could feel the adrenaline starting to fade, leaving a raw awareness of how vulnerable that alley had made me feel. Whoever had been there could have been anywhere, and they could move with complete control over the shadows. After a while, we documented everything. Photos, notes, the works. I couldn't stop thinking about the animal and how quickly it had disappeared. It wasn't normal for someone to leave cages like that unattended, and the way the van had shifted implied a level of awareness and presence that was unnerving. I couldn't imagine what would have happened if I had leaned in just a second later, or if I hadn't called for backup. The thought of someone watching me, slipping in and out without making a sound, was terrifying. By the time I left the alley, the sun was still far from rising, and the streets were emptying of the late-night crowd. I drove slowly back to the station, my mind replaying the events over and over. I logged the call and made the necessary reports, but the feeling of unease stayed with me. That alley, that van, and the empty cages left a mark I couldn't shake. It reminded me that danger isn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it moves silently, unseen, in the spaces you think are safe. In the days that followed, we increased patrols in that area, checking alleys and abandoned lots, looking for anything unusual. We never found another van like that. We never found the animal. But the experience stuck with me. Every time I pass a narrow alley at night, I remember that van, the empty cages, and the sudden, quiet shift of the driver's seat. It was a clear reminder of how quickly a situation can change, how fast something can disappear, and how easily someone could move through a city unnoticed. It was one of the most unsettling calls of my career, not because of what I saw, but because of what I didn't see. The invisible presence that could be there at any moment, and the thought that even with backup, there's no guarantee you can control it. I still patrol those streets, but I do it with a new awareness. I check every corner, every shadow, every van that seems out of place. The alley behind that Wicker Park business taught me a lesson about vigilance, about the hidden dangers that exist in silence, and about the unpredictable nature of people who operate in the dark. And while I never saw that van again, the memory of it, and the empty cages, is something I carry with me every time I walk through a quiet street at night. It serves as a reminder that some threats aren't obvious, some dangers move in silence, and some mysteries don't have answers, only the sharp, chilling reality that they exist. I was on duty in Philadelphia that morning, and it was one of those nights that felt heavier than usual. The streets were quiet, almost empty, and the city seemed to be holding its breath. At 4 a.m., we were dispatched to a small hospital on the outskirts. The call was strange. Staff reported a man claiming he had seen something inside the building. There was no mention of a break-in at first, just this sense of unease that someone was watching. I remember feeling a knot in my stomach when I heard the address. That part of the city was old, the roads narrow and cracked, with industrial buildings on either side that hadn't been touched in decades. The hospital itself was small, 2 stories, brick, with a faint hum from the emergency generators. When we arrived, the parking lot was nearly empty, just a few staff cars scattered near the entrance. The front doors were locked, and the lights in the lobby were dim, giving the place an almost abandoned feel. A maintenance worker met us outside. He looked shaken, pale, and his hands were trembling slightly. He explained that a patient room had been broken into. His voice was quiet, nervous, like he was afraid we might not believe him. He insisted he had seen a man in the hallway, someone who wasn't supposed to be there. I followed him inside. The hospital smelled like disinfectant, mixed with the faint odor of old carpeting and something metallic, probably from the emergency department. We checked the room he mentioned. Nothing was disturbed. No signs of forced entry, no drawers opened, no items missing. It was a standard patient room, beds made, monitors on standby, everything normal. The feeling of unease didn't leave me, though. Hospitals at night are quiet in a way that's different from daytime. There's a kind of unnatural silence, and every little sound echoes. We asked to see the security footage. The staff led us to a small office, monitors lining the walls. The first few cameras showed nothing unusual. Empty hallways, quiet corridors, a janitor pushing a cart in the distance. But then we reached the camera covering the hallway near the patient rooms. I froze as I watched. The footage was grainy, but there it was. A figure, dark, thin, moving just behind a nurse as she walked down the hall. The movement was subtle, almost a shadow blending into the background, disappearing whenever she turned. The nurse didn't notice anything, and the figure didn't make a sound. We went back and slowed the footage down, adjusting the contrast and brightness. It became clearer. The figure was there, standing behind a curtain in one of the rooms, waiting. It never moved toward anyone, never touched anything, but it stayed just out of reach, watching. The maintenance worker was adamant he had seen it in real life, not just on the footage. He said it had been standing in a corner, its attention on patients, waiting, silent. He swore he could feel it staring at him, even when he couldn't see it. We reviewed every camera on that floor. The figure didn't appear anywhere else. It wasn't caught on other cameras entering or leaving. It was as if it had been there the whole time, slipping past sensors, unnoticed, undetectable. We checked the building for anyone else, any doors left unlocked, any possible hiding spots. There was nothing. Every window was secure, every entrance accounted for. The more we reviewed, the more the footage seemed to distort. Frames would skip, sections would disappear, then return. By the time we looked again an hour later, the footage of the hallway with the figure was gone. Completely erased, nothing left but a blank screen. We tried to recover it through the hospital's system, through external backups, and even through the cloud storage, but it was never recovered. The IT department claimed no one had accessed it. Nothing could explain it. We documented the incident, wrote reports, and spoke to the hospital staff. They were uneasy, but there was nothing to go on. No fingerprints, no witnesses other than the maintenance worker. The staff kept whispering about it for weeks. They said some nights they could feel the same presence, a weight in the corner of the room, a glance at the ceiling that felt like eyes watching them. None of them reported any physical encounters, just the sense of being observed. The hospital continued to operate normally, but the feeling lingered. I kept thinking about it on the way back to the station. Hospitals are supposed to be safe. Patients are vulnerable. Staff are trained to care and protect. Yet that night, someone or something had moved through the halls unseen, untraceable, watching without making a sound. I kept replaying the footage in my head, the figure standing behind the curtain, the nurse walking by, oblivious, the tension of knowing someone was there, patient yet menacing, silent yet impossible to ignore. Weeks later, I returned to that hospital for another call. The same hallways, the same rooms. Everything appeared normal. The staff were professional, polite, trying to put the incident behind them. But I noticed the subtle looks they gave each other when the cameras were mentioned, the way they lingered near the corners, the way they seemed to move with an extra glance over their shoulders. It wasn't fear in the panicked sense, but a quiet, constant awareness. I never saw the figure again, and no one ever caught anyone inside the hospital. There were no signs of forced entry, no items missing, no security alerts. Yet the memory stayed with me. I thought about the skill it must have taken to move without leaving traces, to evade cameras, to choose exactly when and where to appear, and to disappear without a trace. It was a reminder that even in places we think are controlled, even in places designed to protect the vulnerable, there are things beyond our understanding, people moving in ways that don't fit the rules. I closed my report and filed it in the system, but I keep a personal copy. Sometimes I review it, thinking maybe there was something we missed, some clue hidden in the footage, some indication of who it was. I still feel it whenever I walk down a hospital hallway at night. The way a shadow might shift just slightly, the way a corner might look darker than it should, the way silence in an empty building can feel heavier than any noise. That night, nothing happened that could be proven, but the experience left a mark. It reminded me that even in the most ordinary, controlled, and secure places, there are unknowns. People, or entities, with intentions we may never understand. The maintenance worker eventually moved on. The hospital continued to operate. The footage remained lost. But I never forget the figure behind the curtain, watching silently, and the sense that in a place designed to heal, someone could slip in and observe without leaving a trace. It was a clear, harsh lesson in how fragile our perception of safety can be. I was on patrol that night around 11:45 p.m., driving north on I-95 near Daytona Beach. The highway was mostly empty, the usual stretch of asphalt lit only by my headlights and the faint glow of street lamps that were spaced far apart. It was one of those nights where the air felt heavy and humid, sticking to your skin no matter how high you cranked the AC in the car. I was running a routine check, scanning the road, checking the signs of speeders or anyone who might be driving under the influence. The night was quiet, except for the occasional rumble of a truck in the distance. I remember thinking it was strange how calm everything seemed before what happened. Then, out of nowhere, a car shot past me. It was moving fast, weaving slightly in its lane, and the way it accelerated made it clear the driver wasn't just in a hurry. They were trying to get away from something, or maybe just testing the limits. I flipped on my sirens and lights and started pursuit. As soon as I got behind them, I realized this wasn't a normal chase. The driver didn't slow down. They didn't acknowledge me at all. No flashing lights, no braking. Just full speed down the highway, swerving slightly but never hitting anything. I tried the radio, tried calling in, but the static was heavy and my voice barely carried over the noise of the engine and the wind rushing past us. The car stayed ahead, pushing us further from the city lights, deeper into the less traveled stretches of road. The chase went on for about 10 miles. At first, I assumed the driver would eventually pull over, maybe get caught in traffic or realize the futility. But then they took an exit into a dark, wooded area off the highway. The turn was sharp and narrow, almost hidden between tall pines and oaks, and the headlights barely cut through the shadows. I slowed for a moment, double-checking my surroundings, making sure I wasn't about to drive into something. But the car kept going, and I followed. The road ended abruptly, gravel giving way to dirt, and then the driver disappeared into the trees. That's when I pulled over and got out of my vehicle. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, expecting to call for backup, only to realize my radio wasn't working. Dead as a stone. No crackle, no static, nothing. Normally, that would make me pause, but I didn't. The thought of someone running through those woods in the middle of the night, alone, made me move. I stepped into the forest, flashlight cutting a thin line of white through the dark. The leaves were thick underfoot, branches brushing against my arms as I pushed through. The sound of the highway faded behind me, leaving only the distant rustling of trees and the occasional snap of a twig. My pulse was high, every nerve on edge, and every little noise made me tense. Then I saw the car. It was abandoned in a small clearing, engine still warm, lights off. Doors locked, windows up, nothing inside. No sign of the driver. My first thought was that maybe they ran off when they realized they were cornered, but as I scanned the ground, I saw no footprints, no marks in the dirt, no sign of a struggle. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. That's when I noticed it. A tree next to the car had something carved into it. The words were deep, jagged, and crude. "I see you." My stomach turned. I checked my surroundings, shining the flashlight in every direction, expecting to see someone crouched, laughing, or hiding. But the woods were empty, completely silent, except for the sound of my own breathing and the distant hum of the highway. I tried my radio again, cursed under my breath, and started moving cautiously around the area. Every now and then I would hear a rustle behind me, or the snap of a branch, and I would spin with my flashlight, heart racing, only to see nothing. I combed the area for nearly an hour, moving deeper into the woods, checking the perimeter around where the car was found. No footprints, no tire marks leading away from the clearing. Nothing. It was unnerving. I've dealt with plenty of chases before, plenty of suspects who try to run, but nothing like this. This was different. This felt deliberate, almost as if the person had been waiting for me, letting me follow, and then disappearing in a way that was impossible to trace. Eventually, I had to call it. My radio was still dead, no backup had made it through the trees, and the woods were too thick to continue safely alone. I marked the location, took a few photos, and called in from my car once I got back to a point with signal. The car was eventually towed, checked for fingerprints, anything that could give us a lead, but there was nothing. No prints inside, no DNA, no evidence of the driver anywhere nearby. We ran background checks on the vehicle, but it didn't lead anywhere either. It was registered to someone, sure, but the name turned out to be false, or at least unverifiable. The case went cold after that. A car full of questions and no answers, and a forest that seemed to swallow the truth whole. Since that night, every time I drive that stretch of I-95, even in the middle of the day, I feel it. That feeling like eyes are on me, tracking me, watching me. It's subtle at first, almost like a shadow brushing the edge of your vision, but it never leaves. I'll glance over at the trees along the highway, at the dark patches where the forest edges the road, and I expect, just for a second, to see someone standing there waiting. The memory of that carved message has stuck with me. I see you. It wasn't a joke, it wasn't a prank. It was deliberate, and it was real. The woods didn't swallow the car. The driver didn't vanish into magic. They just disappeared in a way that made me realize how little control we have once someone wants to be invisible. That night taught me that some people don't leave traces, don't follow the rules, and can move in ways that make all your training and instincts feel useless. I still patrol that area. I still do my job. But the quiet nights, the empty stretches of highway, they're different now. Every car that speeds past, every shadow at the tree line, makes my pulse quicken. I know I'll never get answers about that driver. I know there will never be a record of who they were or what they were doing. The only thing that remains is the memory of a warm car in the dark, an empty forest, and a message carved in bark that still haunts me every time I drive by. It's a reminder that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, and some dangers aren't visible until it's too late. That chase never ended. Not really. It ended in paperwork and cold leads, but in my mind, in my gut, it's still out there somewhere, watching, waiting, always just at the edge of the trees along I-95.